Hello, welcome to Growing in Uncertainty. My name is Tess Miller, and through my seminar and coaching business, Wings Unfolded, I help people who love what they're doing, but they're not sure where it's going. Sometimes when we lack clarity about what we're doing in our lives, it can actually drain our energy and make us feel uncertain about the things that we really want to be doing and the direction we want to be going, who we want to be in the world. So my intention with these videos is to help you get clarity about yourself so that you can make those decisions about what you want to do and who you want to be going forward. So over the last few weeks, I have been talking about one of the biggest monsters of making us stuck in our lives. And that big monster is the monster of self-doubt. And I've been talking about the tools that we can use in regards to self-doubt. So some of the other videos that I have put out have been the importance of self-acknowledgement, self-acceptance, self-trust, and last week's was self-confidence. So if you want to go back and watch any of those, I invite you to do so. All of these elements go into helping us combat any of the self-doubt that we have in our lives. And it really, any of these things will help us be more authentic versions of ourselves so that we're not holding ourselves back anymore in our lives. So today's topic is really personally big for me. It is on the need for self-forgiveness. And this is one that I still struggle with. I will be completely honest. Self-forgiveness is one of the, it's just plain hard. I'll just put it that way. I am a recovering perfectionist and a recovering people pleaser and a recovering do-gooder in my life. I recognize so many times in my life when I've created standards for myself that are simply impossible. They're standards that I would never hold anybody else to. So why am I holding myself to those standards? So anyway, forgiving myself has been a really important skill for me to continue working on in my life. One of the reasons I think it's difficult for me, and you may resonate with this in your own life, I don't know, I have this desire to be a good person, but it's not just that. Like, I want to know that I'm a good person, but the shadow side of that is that I want other people to see me as a good person too. And when it seems like other people don't see me as a good person, then that's when I turn a lot of shame and blame and anger and resentment in towards myself to try and make myself into a good person. But what I found, oh, thank you, Scott. What I have found is that that doesn't actually make me in the long run feel any better about myself by blaming myself. It doesn't make me any better of a person to do that. It just makes me feel really bad. So that's what we're going to be talking about today, how to go through the process of forgiving ourselves. So what are the things that we need to forgive ourselves for? A lot of times there can be certain actions or experiences that we have in our lives that we feel really bad about, maybe how something turned out or how we behaved or decisions that we made. Or it can be that we feel like, other people don't experience us in the way that we intend for them to experience us. And that means that they're perceiving us in a different way than we think of ourselves. And that might be hard to forgive ourselves for as well. But here are the reasons that it's important to learn how to forgive yourself. When we are not forgiving ourselves, we can fall into a trap of self-hatred and self-doubt, certainly. You can end up not trusting yourself. You know, if you're not forgiving yourself, then that kind of puts a wedge between you and your self-trust. You certainly feel bad about yourself a lot when you're not forgiving yourself. You can end up holding yourself back or keeping yourself small in some way, not allowing yourself to really step into your full expression of who you are and what you're capable of. And you also prevent yourself from learning life lessons that could be really powerful and help you become more of the person that you do intend to become. Sometimes, for example, when it comes to experiences where I have a hard time forgiving myself, I'll think that I need to punish myself with a certain thought loop of, oh, I'm such a bad person. I'm a horrible person. I think that if I say that to myself, that I'll learn from the experience, and that thought will force me into being a better person. I'll redeem myself if I think those things. But really, what ends up happening is that it's like it lets me off the hook of actually doing the work that I need to be doing in order to become a better version of myself. It means that I temporarily think that I've paid my dues for whatever it is that has happened. And falling into that negative thought loop doesn't actually do anything for me or the other people that might have been affected by a behavior or an action of mine or the situation at hand. And it's certainly not taking ownership. It's basically wallowing in self-flagellation. And you stay stuck where you are in that. One of the biggest life lessons for me has been learning that I get to decide whether or not I'm a good person, regardless of what other people say. Yes, it's nice to hear when other people say that I'm a good person, but ultimately I won't believe it until I decide that I'm a good person. I have to stop putting that authority outside of myself. And reclaiming that authority means taking ownership and responsibility, which once you can do those things for yourself, it can be so empowering to be able to do that. So according to the dictionary, forgiveness is the action or process of being forgiven. And what I thought was really interesting about that definition is the word action. For whatever reason, for years, I thought forgiveness was a feeling. You would feel forgiven for something. And yet, it's not. It's actually an action that we take, either towards other people's, but in the case of today's talk, it's an action that you take for yourself or towards yourself. Psychologists say that forgiveness is a conscious, deliberate decision to release feelings of resentment or vengeance towards a person or group or yourself who has harmed you, regardless of whether they actually deserve your forgiveness. And that's a hard one, I think, for most people. The idea that you can forgive someone who has done something horrible to you. And you can forgive yourself if you yourself have done something horrible. But here's the catch. When we forgive someone else, sometimes it's a little bit easier Because forgiving someone else doesn't mean that you have to reconcile with them. You can if you choose to, but it doesn't mean that you have to. It doesn't, and it certainly doesn't mean that you have to forget what happened. But forgiving it is an action of accepting what happened. And that's it, really. It's knowing that that person outside of you may have done something to you that was totally inappropriate and uncalled for, and they were in a certain mind space in their lives when they did that. And forgiving them means that you don't have to stay stuck in that that position of resentment and anger and hatred. So forgiveness is always about allowing us to become free from those thoughts and emotions. But when it comes to forgiving ourselves, we do have to reconcile with ourselves. There is an extra step that we have to take. That's why forgiving ourselves is so hard. It is so challenging, but it's also probably one of the most important things that we can do for ourselves in our lives. The consequences of not forgiving ourselves are extreme. It can mean the difference between having a life of productivity and happiness and fulfillment versus always feeling like you hate yourself. So let's talk about what it takes to forgive ourselves. There are three things that it takes. According to research, forgiveness requires 3 elements. The first one is an objective fault or wrongdoing. So, the difference between objective and subjective. Objective is, without emotion. This is a concrete fact that this happened. So, for example, I have a confession to make to you all today. I did something wrong. And the wrongdoing for me today was that I turned in my grades late to the school where I teach. They were due at 9 a.m. this morning, and for whatever reason, I dropped the ball. That is a fact. There is really no other way to look at it. The due date was 9 a.m. this morning. I missed it. Okay. Subjective would be if I decided that I went to an event and I wore the wrong outfit. Now, one might say that could be objective if you showed up to a pool party and you wore a tuxedo. But ultimately, not necessarily. If you didn't want to go swimming, then a tuxedo is perfectly fine. You get to decide whether or not a tuxedo is appropriate. So, that's just a silly little way to look at objective versus subjective. So that's the first element that has to be present in order to decide whether or not self-forgiveness is in order. The second element is we need to be able to overcome our negative feelings. So back to my story about not submitting my grades. I feel really bad about getting my grades in late today. I feel embarrassed. I feel ashamed. I feel a little angry at myself for not being on the ball. I normally am. Like, what's up with me that I wasn't on the ball? So I'm allowing myself to feel those feelings. But, if I really force myself to feel those feelings a lot, then I could very easily get stuck in a form of self-punishment. It doesn't change the past if I keep punishing myself. Instead, what I needed to do when I realized what happened is I needed to focus on turning my grades in. If I had continued punishing myself, it would have gotten in the way of me actually doing what I needed to do. So we have to be able to overcome our negative feelings if we want to be able to forgive ourselves. And finally, the third element is that there needs to be internal acceptance of one's self. So the acceptance in my story situation is that I recognize that lately I've been a little bit distracted by a lot of things that are going on in my life right now. I realize that there's just too much on my plate, and I accept that, I acknowledge it, and I know that I need to make some adjustments in my life so that I'm less distracted going forward. So, what does it take, ultimately to be able to forgive ourselves? First of all, we have to acknowledge that our behavior was wrong or out of alignment once we've established an objective wrongdoing. This includes acknowledging our feelings of blame and shame. And then we have to accept the responsibility for whatever it is that we did. That's the taking ownership part of things. And that's not always easy. It hurts, it's hard. We don't always want to do that. And then the third thing is that it requires a lot of inner strength from ourselves. It's not comfortable to forgive ourselves. And that's something that I had to learn, is that it doesn't necessarily feel comfortable at all to go through the process of forgiving yourself. So I'm going to tell you another story from my life. This is a story that's about 25 years old, actually. But what I'm going to do with this story is I'm going to tell you the story, and then I'm going to take you through the steps of how to forgive yourself using the example of my story. So I hope this will help you in your process if you realize that there's something from your past or something right now that you need to forgive yourself for and would benefit from going through this process. So this particular story, by the way, I may have only shared with one or two other people in my life because that's how much shame comes up for me when I talk about it. And so bear with me. 25 years ago, I was a student in college, and my boyfriend had just broken up with me for the, third time. And I was really upset and hurt about it. And he wasn't really talking to me about it. So I was really unclear about, well, why did you break up with me? Am I really that bad of a person? And, I could not let it go. My emotions were completely overwhelming to me. In the meantime, I still had to, go to concerts and do all of the things that I was doing as a music student. And one day I had a concert that I had to play in, and it was a joint concert. My band played first on the first half of the concert. The other band played on the second half of the concert. And we were required to stay for the other band's performance, of course. So as I was walking into the audience and finding my seat to watch the performance of the other band, an old friend came up to me, and this was during intermission time, and wanted to know what was going on in my life. And because I was so emotionally overwhelmed with what was going on with my boyfriend breaking up with me, I launched into the story, and then intermission ended, but my story wasn't over yet. And again, I was still so emotionally overwrought. I felt like I needed to keep telling my friend what was happening. So I continued talking, even though the band had started playing. Now, I'm a musician, and I know how bad it is to be the person in the audience who's talking while the concert is going on. Despite that, again, my emotions were totally overwhelming me, and I just needed to get this story out. Well, finally, my band director stood up from where he was sitting, and he turned around and he did. And then motioned to the door and asked me to leave. And it was so shameful. I felt so horrible because this was my band director. I looked up to him so much. He was a mentor and he was a good person. He modeled a lot of the things that I wanted to be when I grew up. And I let him down in that moment because my emotions were so overwhelming. Oh, I felt horrible. So, as you can see, this is why I have not shared this story, because I should have known better. What was I thinking? These are all the thoughts that come up for me when I think about this story. So anyway, that is the story of one of the things that feels so unforgivable to me in my life. So the first step in forgiving myself in this is to first acknowledge and accept what has happened. It's so hard. There's resistance when I think about acknowledging and accepting the fact that I talked through a concert and got caught by my band director. But acknowledge and accept I must. It happened. I can't change the past. Step 2 in this process is to think about what I learned. What did I learn from this situation? Well, I learned that sometimes my emotions can get the better of me, and maybe at that moment in my life, I hadn't done the work to learn how to emotionally regulate myself. That took time, and I can see that now. Hindsight is such a blessing when it comes to looking at this story. I can see that emotional regulation was a skill that I needed to develop, and I think I have at this point for the most part. Anyway, so I learned a lot about needing to emotionally regulate, needing to really make sure that I am being the adult in the situation and not letting my emotions override the moment, not getting caught up in that quite so much. The third step, step 3 in this process, is to recognize what thoughts my inner critic was using or has been using over these 25 years. Like I said earlier, I noticed that I use my thoughts to punish myself when I've done something that I perceive as wrong or bad. And so I have to, really recognize what those thoughts are and acknowledge them. And I just said some of them, what was I thinking? How could I do that? I should have known better. All of those thoughts. One of the biggest thoughts for me is, I'm such a horrible person for doing that. So those are my inner critic thoughts. Step 4 is to acknowledge what emotions come up for you. Well, certainly a lot of shame, blame, anger towards myself, embarrassment. Oh my gosh, lots of embarrassment. Step 5 is to pretend that your inner critic is another person and have a conversation with your inner critic. So what I could do in this situation is explain to my inner critic from my perspective what happened. I was emotionally overwrought. I was not in my, logic brain. I was in my heart totally. I was not thinking clearly. But then you can have your inner critic describe from his or her perspective what they experienced. So my inner critic would have the opportunity to say, but you embarrassed me so much. I felt so ashamed when you did that. So you go through that process of having a conversation, almost like you're having a confrontation with another person. Use a lot of I statements from either perspective, and acknowledge and validate each other's feelings. So your inner critic can acknowledge and validate, It makes sense that you would have talked during that concert because you were so emotionally overwrought. Anybody in your position might have done the same thing. And then from your perspective, it makes sense, inner critic, that you felt ashamed and embarrassed. You know, you have learned from the age of 3 that you don't talk during concerts. So the fact that you were in your early 20s and you were doing that, wow, no wonder you felt so ashamed. Anybody would feel that way. Step 6 in this process is to, when you're ready, apologize to your inner critic. So, an apology might be, I am so sorry that happened. And here's what I learned from that experience. I won't do that again going forward. I understand how much hurt I caused you. And then you can allow your inner critic to say, even though I talked during a concert, or you can fill in the blank with whatever it is that you need to forgive yourself for, I can now see the circumstances that led me to doing that. I understand that I have learned from that experience. And because I felt and expressed remorse, I forgive myself. I also acknowledge that in every life situation, I'm doing the best that I can under every circumstance. And that is the process of apologizing and giving forgiveness to yourself. Oh, but there's one more step. Step 7, decide if there's something else you want to do. For example, do you need to apologize to somebody, an actual other person? Or do you need to maybe write this all down so you have it in paper form and you can see it if you do start to feel those feelings of shame? Do you need to call someone and tell them about it so that you verbalize it? You hear yourself talking about it out loud. Or maybe you need to just do something fun with yourself to demonstrate that you've reconciled with yourself after forgiving yourself. Any of those things can be positive actions that you can take. So does this mean you'll never ever fall into self-blame ever again? Or into that I'm a horrible person thought loop? No, you'll probably do it again. I know I will. I know I do. But that just means that I have to keep practicing. I have to keep building that muscle. I have to keep honing that skill so that I become better and forgiving myself becomes more automatic. And I might have to go through that process again and again, multiple times on the same unforgivable act until I do reach a saturation point of forgiveness. Patterns in our lives can be challenging to break. It's, that's a truth. That's a big truth. But they're not impossible to break. So, as I've said in other videos, my 2021 focus word for the year is freedom. And when we can forgive ourselves, we become so free to be more of ourselves and be comfortable in our own skin and to reconcile with ourselves. It frees up space inside of you to be more of who you are and feel other things so that you can have energy to focus on the things in your life that you really want to be focusing on rather than the things that are holding you back. It also allows us to be free, to be human, because we all are human after all, just like everyone else. So let yourself be human and forgive yourself for things that you've done. You have always done the best that you could. So I hope that message resonates with you all today. I know that was kind of a long one. Sorry about that. But like I said, it's a hard one for me, so I had a lot to say. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm always so grateful for your presence and your willingness to listen. And I'd love to hear with you how any of these ideas resonate with you. Please like or share these videos with friends or family who might benefit from hearing it. Also, I want to mention that I'm so close to finishing my book, The Book of Stuck. It's almost there, and I will be doing a book launch very soon. So if you haven't joined my email list to be informed when that launch is going to happen, you can do so on my website, www.tess-miller.com. Please join my email list so you can find out when the book launch is going to happen, so you know when you can get your copy. You can also find me on Facebook and LinkedIn under my business name, Wings Unfolded. I'm also on Instagram and YouTube under my name, Tess Miller. And feel free to send me a private message if you feel like you want to reach out to me and discuss further, or want to find out how you might work with me. And as always, remember that it's okay to be stuck, but you don't have to stay there. Have an amazing week, everyone. Take care. Bye.